one of the reasons for us to put together this event was to go back and to revisit whether this is indeed the case, whether we have lost the attention and interest on what happens in the Mediterranean, in the Eastern Mediterranean route or in the Central Mediterranean route. And where are we in 2017 in relation to unsafe passage, reports of missing persons, and dead bodies in the Mediterranean? And it's just during the Easter vacation, this made the news just a little bit. There are tiny stories that come out. And if you may have seen, not with a lot of images anymore. We don't see a lot of pictures, but maybe lots of numbers. This story has turned into a number of persons who are missing or lost in the Mediterranean. So we want to go back and revisit this debate. So this is why we're here with an amazing all-star panel in order to get our attention into the subject and debate it. I have an outstanding panel to be able to discuss these issues today. And we have made sure that we have presenters and panelists from different sectors of the society and from different academic policy circles. So I think the panel represents this distribution of people who have been directly involved in policy making in the past 3 to 4 years. First, I'd like to thank Laurent Muschel. He is the Director for Migration and Protection at the European Commission. So thank you very much for coming over from Brussels for this debate, Mr. Muschel. And Monsieur Muschel has been an outstanding member of the European Commission for a very long time. He started working at the Commission, I believe, in 1994. And he has worked in different directorates at the European Commission, and finally, for the recent, I think since 2013, he's working at the directorate that is directly involved in policy making on exactly these issues. So we're very happy to have you here. One of the things we know about the Mediterranean is the crucial role that the non-governmental organizations have been playing in the rescue missions. And so I'm incredibly thankful again to Tankred Stöbe. He is from Médecins Sans Frontières. He's a member of the International Board of Médecins Sans Frontières. Previously, he also led Médecins Sans Frontières Germany for a long time. He has actively participated in rescue missions in and around Libya. And he also has participated in a wide range of Médecins Sans Frontières missions in a large number of jurisdictions that I won't list you all the names, but he has experience of the central Mediterranean route in particular. So thank you so much for being with us here. So of course, no debate is complete without an academic, without a scholarly and a critical perspective. So I'm incredibly delighted to have Professor Ralph Wilde with us today. He's a professor of international law at University College London. He has worked in the recent years in particular extensively on international human rights law and how it interacts with international refugee law. And he's a very careful follower of the legal and jurisprudential developments that have taken place in this issue since 2014. So we're looking forward to your input as well. But I am absolutely delighted to say that we have another member. She's not a member of the panel, but she's actually the leader of this discussion. So Julia Black, she's one of our own. She's a student in the Masters in International Affairs at Hertie School of Governance. She also is a project coordinator for the International Office of Migration. And of course, the International Office of Migration insisted that we also make sure that this is carefully recognized in the introduction. So of course, we're incredibly proud to have Julia as the person who will introduce what has been happening in the Central Mediterranean route. Her work in the International Office of Migration traces the developments, the Missing Persons Project, and they collate the data. So I think she is absolutely the best person to kick off what is the stake, what are the numbers, what are the figures of these nameless individuals that we will be talking about in terms of policy responses. Before I give the floor to Julia for this introduction, I'd like to thank two of our sponsors for this event. The first sponsor is Debating Europe. This is a platform funded by a number of organizations, and the whole purpose of Debating Europe is actually to get different segments of citizens of the European Union to talk about European public policy issues. So we're very happy for them to include this debate within their program. I'd like to also thank the European Commission, and in particular their program entitled Europe for Citizens, to also give support to this debate. And this particular program is very interesting for us. It has a lot of purposes, and again, a public dimension, a public debate dimension is included. But we thought that this debate fits really well with two of their priorities of public debate. The first one is solidarity in times of crisis. I think if you get a more of an expansive understanding of solidarity, here what we mean is by these individuals who are making these unsafe and deadly journeys. So we'd like to extend the interpretation. Another objective of the European Commission is to look at stigmatization of immigrants. And you could say, well, these individuals have not arrived yet in Europe. Why are we debating about individuals who have not even yet made it? But as a panel, we felt that there is a circularity here. The stigmatization of immigrants in Europe may be directly related to the way that policies are devised in dealing with dangerous and unsafe crossings at the Mediterranean. So we hope that our sponsors also find our angles fitting from this perspective. So I warmly welcome you. Thank you for joining us. There will be quite a lot of time for debate. But before that, I'd like to invite Julia for the introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Başak, for this very nice intro, and it's an honor to be on the other side of the podium. So I'm here today as the project coordinator of the International Organization for Migration's Missing Migrant Project. This slide that you'll see over there is actually all of these dots represent data that we've collected on migrants who have died during migration. I'm here today to sort of set out the state of play on migrant deaths in the Mediterranean. But before I do that, I'd really like to make an important distinction, sort of correct a common misconception when we're talking about migration in the Mediterranean. And that is that not all those who cross the Mediterranean are refugees. In fact, all three routes across the Mediterranean are characterized as mixed migration flows. This means that it's not just refugees who are coming to Europe, but also economic migrants, environmental migrants, trafficked persons, and so on from a very wide variety of countries. I wanted to make this point because we are, after all, talking about policy responses to the crisis, and policy response to a mixed migration flow is enormously complicated. As Başak mentioned, since 2014, we have seen a very large increase in both the number of arrivals and deaths in the Mediterranean. Migrants are trying to reach Europe generally through three main routes, which you can sort of see on these dots: the Western Mediterranean between Spain and Morocco, the Central Mediterranean between Italy and North Africa, and the Eastern Mediterranean between Greece and Turkey. Since 2014, I'm not going to talk much about the Western Mediterranean because though it was a very important flow historically, since immigration controls have increased between Spain and Morocco, it's not quite as significant of a flow as it once was. What I would like to talk about is the Eastern and Central Mediterranean routes. So the Eastern Mediterranean route is taken primarily by migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers from Middle Eastern countries. You, of course, know about the Syrians, but also many Afghanis and Iraqis travel on this route. Arrivals in the Eastern Mediterranean increased tenfold in 2015 compared to 2014. We saw 77,000 arrivals in 2014 and more than 900,000 in 2015 just on this route. Similarly, we saw a very notable increase in deaths in 2015. This was actually a 12-fold increase, so in fact the number of deaths has outpaced the number of arrivals in the Eastern Mediterranean. However, these arrivals and accordingly deaths have since decreased since the 2016 implementation of the EU-Turkey agreement. We've seen a decrease of 90% in both arrivals and deaths on this route. However, you might notice on this graph that though 2015 was unprecedented in the number of arrivals, 2016 was, very unusual in that the number of deaths in the Mediterranean increased drastically while the number of arrivals decreased. This is due in large part to the central Mediterranean route from North Africa to Italy and to a lesser extent Malta. Migrants traveling along this route almost always use the aid of smugglers. More than 90% of these migrants leave from Libya, another 8 to 10% leave from Egypt, and some small number from Tunisia. Migrants on this route are primarily from Western Africa and the Horn of Africa. Obviously, they're coming from different sides of the African continent, but they almost all travel through the Sahara and then up to Libya, which is quite unstable, and many migrants actually die before they ever reach the Mediterranean. So it's important to understand when we talk about the Central Mediterranean, the search and rescue context. So much of the search and rescue operations carried out in the Central Mediterranean are carried out by the Italian National Coast Guard, though we do see a growing presence of NGO rescue operations. And since 2016, the Libyan Coast Guard has also begun to more frequently carry out rescue operations within Libyan waters. It's also important to understand the legal context of search and rescues in the Central Mediterranean. So in 2012, the European Court of Human Rights ruled on the Hertie versus Italy case. And this basically meant that instead of search and rescue operations carried out by the Italian government, they were previously had returned migrants to North Africa, but since this ruling declared that this was illegal, and now they must return migrants that they rescue to Italy or to the state in which it's operated. Now, historically, deaths on the Central Mediterranean far outweigh the number of deaths on either the eastern or western route. And this absolutely has held true during the recent crisis. My project has recorded more than 3,000 deaths on the Central Mediterranean alone between 2014 and in both 2014 and 2015. In 2016, this increased drastically to over 4,500 deaths just on the Central Mediterranean. So you might be asking, why is the Central Mediterranean so much more deadly than other routes? And you can see on this map, perhaps visually, it's a much longer overseas journey. So those who travel via the eastern and western routes only have to cross, perhaps a couple dozen kilometers of open waters, while those who must travel, who cross the Central Mediterranean, must cross hundreds of kilometers. These journeys often take several days. Compounding this issue is the fact that much larger boats are used by smugglers on the Central Mediterranean route. So, for example, in the Eastern Mediterranean, we usually see inflatable boats carrying about 20 people and wooden boats carrying about 35 people. In the Central Mediterranean, this is really like an order of magnitude greater. So inflatable boats carry between 120 to 130 people, and wooden boats, which are less commonly used, but are, present a much greater risk as they carry between 300 up to 700 or 800 migrants at a given time. So obviously these factors mean that search and rescue operations have to deal with a much larger number of people, often in areas of the ocean that are much farther from shore. So to get back to this unprecedented number of deaths that we saw last year, so we recorded 5,098 deaths in 2016. This is and 4,500 of these were in the central Mediterranean alone. This 4,500 number represents a 60% increase over the 2015 central Mediterranean. And this increase comes despite lower overall arrivals numbers to Europe. It also comes despite increased search and rescue operations in 2016. Of course, I do have to give a disclaimer. The number of arrivals in the central Mediterranean did increase slightly last year by about 17%. However, I would argue that a 17% increase in arrivals simply does not explain a 60% increase in the number of deaths. While I'm sure our panelists will have more to say about this, IOM's operations on the ground indicate that this increase is at least in part due to increasingly unsafe smuggling practices in the central Mediterranean. So since 2016, we have seen an increasing number of ships leaving at the same time. This means that when a shipwreck occurs, it's not just one ship that requires that search and rescue operations must then find and rescue, but there are several which in different locations, which makes things much more dangerous. In fact, this weekend, you might have read it, the UNHCR reported 100 people died in a shipwreck. It was actually 7 shipwrecks that occurred in various locations between Libya and Italy. It's also, this increase in the number of deaths in 2016 is also linked to an increase in the number of migrants attempting the crossing during winter months. So we saw this winter about a 50% increase in the number of migrants making it to Italy compared to the previous 2 winters. Of course, migrants who cross during winter months must face much more harsh weather conditions, and this obviously poses a huge problem when we're talking about search and rescue operations. This year, 2017, we have seen a lower number of arrivals overall in the Mediterranean, and accordingly a lower number of deaths. However, this is largely due to the effective closure of the Eastern Mediterranean route. So we've seen an 80% decrease in arrivals and deaths on that route. However, we do see both a higher number of arrivals and deaths in the Central Mediterranean route, this route that is and has been so deadly. We do see a 45% increase in the number of arrivals this year. There are already 37,000 people, migrants, who have reached Italy, compared to only 25,000 last year, or during this period of last year. And this includes almost 8,000 people who were rescued just over the Easter weekend. We do see already increasingly a larger and larger number of deaths in the central Mediterranean. We have recorded, as of today, 1,002 deaths already, just in the last 4 months. And this includes, again, these 7 shipwrecks this weekend, which is really, emblematic of the larger issue of these dangerous smuggling practices in the central Mediterranean. While it is impossible, of course, to predict what will happen this year, this rise in deaths in the central Mediterranean is a strong indication of a need for a more comprehensive policy response. But before we get to the panelists, I just want to make one last point. Because this is, of course, a debate about policy solutions in the Mediterranean, I want to want everyone to keep in mind what a solution really is. Is it just to slow the number of immigrants coming to Europe, or is it to actually prevent migrant deaths and address the humanitarian needs of these people? Many migrants die before they reach Europe, and often do so in a much less visible way. So you can see in this chart, last year the Mediterranean region did represent the largest proportion of deaths. However, we did record almost 1,400 migrant deaths in North Africa alone. It's suspected that many more die in the Sahara, where there is obviously not a lot of people collecting data. And given these many dangers that migrants face before they ever even reach the shores of the Mediterranean, I think it's, I'm really looking forward to hearing the policy proposals put forth by our panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we have more and more deaths in the Mediterranean. I think one of the things that came out of the presentation in terms of facts, of course, we can read a lot of things into this. I mean, why the number is increasing. But I want to turn to our panelists and ask, from your perspective, what have been the policy responses to this particular finding that the number of deaths have continued to increase in getting people trying to get into Europe? So shall we start with you, Monsieur Muschel?
Yes, okay. I have some slides as well. Can you put them? Yeah. Well, you have been already bombarded with data, but I just, yeah. But this one is a kind of summary of what has been said before, where you see the three main routes, and the data compare 2016 with 2015. So in fact, if you look at the agency, we have a sharp decrease in the number. In 2015, you had almost 900,000 people arriving from Turkey to the Greek islands, with many deaths. And then the year after, once we had the deal with Turkey, the famous EU-Turkey statement, there was a decrease by 79%. In fact, if you compare from March last year, where we signed the deal, and March this year, it was a decrease of arrival by 98%. And as a consequence, there were 93% less people who died on that route. So one of the policy answers has been to stop the flows from Turkey to the Greek islands. And nowadays, we have people arriving, but in very small numbers, and this is manageable. The Coast Guard are doing the job, and most of the people have been rescued. This being said, it's not always the case. Today, there was an incident today, and 10 people die on the Aegean Sea. At least 10 people, because we are still looking for 25 other people. So every single day, there are people dying, unfortunately. And the media are getting used to it, and we don't talk about it every day, but it's happening every single day. The big question now is what's going on the Central Med route, because on the Central Med route, as it has been said in the past, this is a much more dangerous route, longer distance, rough sea, and that's where the incidents are arriving. Let me try to, yeah. What I want to illustrate, you have seen many pictures like that in the media, but what I want to illustrate is the difficulty for the people doing search and rescue. So since the beginning of the crisis, since the incident in 2014, we have expanding our operation, Frontex operation, now which is called the European Border and Coast Guard Agency. So we have operation called Triton and Poseidon, which are helping doing search and rescue activities, saving lives. But what is happening, and here it's commercial vessels, which has been the shortest to go to the rescue. There is a boat, a dinghy, like it was mentioned, with more than 150 people on board. You can see the dinghy is in very bad stage. These are dinghies who are built in Libya often, in very poor condition. They cannot sustain high sea, and that's why there is always incident happening. All the migrants arriving in Italy have been rescued. I mean, at more than 90% or 95%. So what is happening here, and I want to illustrate the difficulty, is that when people are being rescued, there's often panic on board. People are going to the water, and if you see on that picture, they don't have any life jackets. And we are talking here about sub-Saharan African, people coming from West Africa mainly, and they have never learned how to swim. So suddenly you have 100 people in the water not knowing how to swim. And the staff on the boat is just overwhelmed by the numbers. So even during the rescue operation, people are dying. Here people died during that operation. So it's not that a simple answer saying, let's put more boats, more rescue operation, and that will solve the problem. And also it can have another negative impact. And sadly, is that the more boats you put closer to the Libyan coast, the more people will feel safe to leave Libya, and more migrants will try to go. So our answer is not only to prevent the departure, but also to inform the migrants that there's a risk of undertaking such a journey. So we are also doing information campaigns to the migrants to prevent them from the departure. The big question, the big issue is these people want to go to Europe and there are not many opportunities to go to Europe. So if you are an economic migrant right now, there are not many opportunities. So one of the big challenges is to offer legal ways to come to Europe so that these people don't try to go risking their lives by boat. And I'm talking only on the economic migrant. On the refugees, it's another story. And again, we have to ensure that refugees can have a space of protection in Europe and have the means to reach Europe to get protection. And that's also a big challenge. Here, I think it's my last slide. You asked me only 3, so I just put 3. You can see the different type of operation which are ongoing with the Italian Coast Guard, the Navy, merchant vessels, NGOs, Frontières, and also the military operation that we have launched, which is called Operation Sophia, which is as a primary role an objective to stop the smugglers, but which in fact does as well a lot of search and rescue operation, because if there's a ship in distress, they will of course rescue the ship. And so you can see the numbers growing so by year from 2013 to 2016. In fact, there was a peak for the Italian Navy because, first of all, they were the most active in the in rescuing at sea. Then merchant vessels decreased as well. It was taken over a bit by Frontex and a lot by the NGOs who have started to intervene in the region, as well as by NAFOR-Med Operation Sophia. So that gives you the total number of people you can see below, which have been rescued in 2016. That means 176, if I can read correctly, almost 180,000 people have been rescued by sea through the different type of operation. Well, that's for a start. Well, maybe I forgot also to point out that we have to break the smuggler model, and this is market economy. It's pure market economy, unfortunately, but it's market economy with people. So now people are living more and more at winter time for different type of reasons. One, because they are afraid that maybe the route will be closed, and there was some discussion between the Libyan government and the Italian government on some deals, so that might be one factor. But also because the price of the departure is less during winter time than during springtime. So you pay less if you depart at winter, market economy. You pay less if you don't buy a life jacket. So you take more risk and you pay less. You pay less if you are on a fishing vessel on below the deck than on the deck, because if the ship sink, you have more chance to go out if you are on the deck. You pay less if you are a Syrian than if you are a sub-Saharan. So if you are a black guy, you will pay more than if you are a Syrian. So there are a number of factors which are happening, and so it's a very, very tragic market economy and very sad market economy. The smugglers, they really are, I don't know how to call it, but they are behaving like the people who were in the slave business in the 18th or 19th century. So this type of approach. So they put fuel enough just to reach international waters. So they put in the boat only fuel to reach international waters, never to reach Italy. It's really, they calculate everything. So the dinghies, the plastic is coming from China, they build it in Libya, they do it in the cheapest manner as possible. So we really need to break the model, and that's why also we have launched this Sophia operation. Thank you.
Thank you. You can keep that one, I think. So I'm just going to turn over to you, Tankred. I mean, one of the statistics here shows a much larger involvement of non-governmental organizations. But beyond that, how do you see the policy responses evolving since 2014?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, before, I mean, you started by saying we only hear numbers anymore, and that's partly true. And let me start maybe by telling you a short story, because I think we have to link it back to the people concerned. This January, I was visiting one of the detention centers along the coast in Libya, and it was quite a striking experience. There were about 40 women from Nigeria, and very desperate women. When I entered, they said, "Please allow us to go home, take us back to Nigeria." And I said, "Well, I'm not a diplomat, I'm a doctor." And then I asked them, "So how was your journey?" And they told me, well, they left their home in a group of about 120 about half a year ago, and they were split up crossing the desert. Took them almost half a year to get to the shore to Libya, and they made it on one of those vessels you have seen, on one of those dinghy inflatable boats. They were pushed on those at night against their will, and they reached the water, but instead of being sort of taken up by a European vessel, they were caught by the Libyan Coast Guard, brought back to Libya and into this detention center. And maybe to sort of, I didn't know that we have slides, otherwise I would have shown you this picture. Quite impressive, actually. This particular detention center was made up for 400 people. There were about a little bit more than 40 now. The bathroom was about sort of ankle deep of urine and feces. Yeah, the smell was quite horrible. And then I said, "Well, I'm not a diplomat, but I'm a doctor, and if you have any health issues, please come to me." But they said, "Well, we are so desperate because we are now here for a month. We are stuck. We had no chance to call home. Nobody at home knows whether we drowned in the Mediterranean, whether we are still alive, whether we are made it to Europe. Nobody knows. We don't know how long we're going to stuck here. It's already a month." And then sort of all of them had medical complaints. Half of them, the biggest sort of medical or health issue was scabies. Scabies and people having sort of huge infections all along their skin. Yeah, and if you looked at that, yeah, the very filthy mattresses, very unhealthy conditions they had to live in, and it was for me small wonder that they felt all sick. I asked them, "So how do you clean yourself?" Yeah, because they said, "Well, we cannot use the bathroom," so they used a bucket and then sort of emptied that bucket into that lake of urine and feces in the bathroom. So they told me they take a little bit of drinking water for a small washing every day, but they didn't have enough food. So it was quite a desperate situation, and this, I mean, this is 2017, yeah, and this is one of the better detention center we've seen. I've seen 5 now this year. The condition in these, and this is a so-called state-run detention center. Yeah? We know that so-called privately run or militia or smuggler-run detention centers are even in a worse condition than this one. So the people are extremely desperate, and I'm challenging a little bit sort of the perspective, and I think sort of the trouble we have here in Europe is that we look through our European lens towards a crisis where hardly any one of us has ever gone through. Yeah, none of us, I've not met a single European journalist, investigator, whatever, who said, "I go all the way back to Niger, to Chad, whatever, and go through the desert and do all the way, go on one of those rubber boats and try to reach Europe." So the stories we hear is that, and many people say, well, the story across the Mediterranean is the worst they had, but many told us also, well, crossing the Sahara was even worse, yeah, because lots of our friends died of dehydration, of starving to death, being kicked off or falling off the truck and not being anyhow treated. So the people who reach Libya have been on the run for sometimes weeks, months, years. But then when they reach Libya, the condition in Libya for sub-Saharan Africans or everyone who's not a Libyan, it's a stateless, it's a failing state. Yeah? The people are shot at, are raped, are forced labor, forced prostitution. So all the bad things you can even imagine, you find in Libya. So and these people and I think we go into that discussion. So I'm not preempting all this, yeah. But yeah, this push and pull factor discussion, yeah. I've not heard a single one who said, you know, this is so attractive to go to Europe. This is a pull factor for me to go. So this again, we look later maybe, but the condition. Many people told me, and here again, it's about dozens and hundreds who said the condition in Libya are so desperate. And I've lost my passport, I've lost my identity card, whatever things, I lost all my money, I even have only the clothes I wear, I can't even make it back home, even if I like to. Yeah. So the only way to get out of Libya, to save my own life, is to go to north, to Europe, whether I like it or not. Yeah. So many people are on the rescue ships we see, they didn't want to go to Europe. Yeah. And I've seen thousands of migrant workers in Libya who looked at me saying, Europe, are you crazy? I never want to go there because I don't want to drown. Yeah? So I think there also the picture is much more complex than saying the thing we hear, hundreds of thousands of people sitting on their coffers waiting to go to Europe. Yeah? It's much more complex, the picture we see in Libya. Last thing maybe on this first thing, we don't see that the situation for the central route, yeah, and that's I think what we look at here tonight, is that the condition for the people are not changing too much in terms of bad boats, whatever. They have always been bad. Yeah? I know in 2015, those rubber boats were very, very bad. The tanks were just lasting to get them offshore, to get them international waters. Yeah? So I would really sort of challenge the view to say, blame the smuggler. The smuggler, it's of course highly criminal. They make lots of money off that. But I think we have to look at the people who are suffering, and no matter, yeah, and I like that you came sort of to the distinction, what is a migrant, an asylum seeker, a refugee. I can tell you, I tried to find that out, yeah, with dozens of people, yeah, people who are just running sort of to get their life saved, yeah. It doesn't matter. It's about life and death, and I think these people, and I've not seen one who said, oh, you know, it's an easy journey, I would like to do it again. Yeah? So the people we rescue on the ships, the people I've seen in the detention center in Libya, so desperate. Yeah? So all of them, no matter what their legal status is, yeah, they deserve to be saved.
So will you tell us about the changing policy responses, or are we seeing the same response over the past 3 years to what's going on?
Well, I think that the main response by international lawyers, as far as law is concerned, has been to call upon states to comply with their obligations. So there is a sense that somehow in relation to the so-called migration crisis, in general, in relation to the situation in Europe, is that somehow a failure to comply with the law or comply with it fully is part of the problem, and that therefore, if there is greater compliance, then things will improve. At the same time, we've also seen some criticisms of the law. So, and now I'm thinking more generally about the so-called refugee crisis, not specifically in relation to the situation of deaths in the Mediterranean, although it's implicated in that. But so some of the critics have said, for example, that the free movement rules of Schengen need to be suspended, and indeed they were suspended, pending a coordinated and equitable pan-European approach to the hosting of refugees. And I think this, to me, reflects the dual way in which international law can be invoked in relation to crisis as both a solution, but also as part of the problem. And I think really the starting point has to be to think about the way in which some of the structural issues here, which I think perhaps are being ignored by the focus, the sort of reactive, superficial focus on the deaths themselves or the situation at sea. And I think we need to look at what lies behind that, what drives people to put themselves in that kind of situation. We've heard some remarks in that regard already. I'd like to focus on the role the law plays in that. So what we have to appreciate, of course, is that the situation in Europe is one of so-called fortress Europe, where essentially many states of the European Union want to keep migrants out. And all of this talk of stopping, reducing deaths at sea, reducing the number of people traveling, is bound up in that. Why? Because, of course, people could make safe journeys into the European Union. I'm sure many of us in this room travel all the time without any problem, without recourse to dangerous, smuggler-enabled and hugely expensive, normally, journeys. Of course, the people who are taking these journeys don't have those entitlements. That's why they make the dangerous journeys. And that's not an accident. That's a deliberate policy by European states, and it is a legally enabled policy through immigration law, migration law, visa restrictions, and the carrier sanctions which are imposed on companies, whether it's airlines or shipping companies, these hefty fines that are imposed on them if they transport individuals into states who don't have an entitlement in immigration law to travel there. And so it's because of these policies and the role the law plays in entrenching them and enforcing them that people have to make these dangerous and irregular journeys, as I say, which are hugely expensive. So this is where the term illegal migrant, which is of course much hated by refugee advocates, no person should be labeled illegal, does actually reflect the general international law proposition that states have a legal entitlement to control their borders, and individuals who cross those borders in contravention of this entitlement without permission are by definition, international legal definition, illegal migrants. So the term is helpful actually in foregrounding how the law is directly involved, partly in determining the dangerous and expensive nature of these crossings. So we might say then that the law is very much part of the problem in terms of the quest for protection for the individuals concerned. But of course, other areas of international law are being invoked as the solution. One area being international human rights law, international refugee law. And the main legal obligation here is the obligation of non-refoulement, the obligation that a state bears not to send someone back to face certain forms of human rights abuse. This is the obligation that gives rise to refugee status. And it exists in refugee law. It also exists in other areas of general human rights law. So that's potentially where what some international lawyers say may be a response to this situation is calling upon states to comply with their obligations in this area of human rights. Now, the difference that might make to this situation, I will perhaps come back to in the second round of questions.
Thank you. So, what are we hearing from our first round of responses? I mean, there was a focus on the economy and the very complex interactions between the smugglers and those who are trying to cross. And of course, turning around here, the thing is, why are we focusing on the smugglers as an area that we have to respond to? Is that what we have to respond to? And it seems that legal arguments may take us both ways. They're not sort of saying that these are the policy responses that states have to take. They seem to have a bit of a leeway as to what they have to do. So let me just go back to you all and ask. So we are, one of the things that came out of this, the first intervention was we should focus on the incentives or the smugglers sort of trying to dismantle this. So what are the limitations to this? I mean, is this going to reach us? Is this going to give us a successful outcome if we say that we must do everything we can to prevent these very dangerous or very deadly journeys? Is there any debate in particular at the EU level about whether this is the way to go in terms of what to target and what to dismantle?
Well, I'd like to start with what was said by my colleague from MSF, because I fully agree with him. This is a complex situation, and there's not a single magical solution, and you have to address different elements in the policy answer. So we have to put more boats at sea, and we have done that to rescue more people. You have to deal with the smugglers, try to dismantle smuggling business, but you have also to address the root cause of migration. And if you don't address the root cause of migration, we will continue to have deaths at sea because people will be desperate to leave. And I agree also, at the end of the day, everybody needs to be saved. Some start their journey because they are economic migrants, and at the end of the journey, there are no more economic migrants. The people have been raped, tortured, and so on, and they have become refugees. So, if it is a very complex situation. I just want to start with the Nigerian girls you have been mentioning. I've been also in Libya, in detention centers. They are appalling. We all know that. But these Nigerian girls, where do they come from? They are not coming from Boko Haram region. They are not fleeing Nigeria because they are under threat of Boko Haram. Most of the girls, and we do interviews when they arrive in Sicily, most of the girls, above 90% of these girls, they are coming from a region next to a city called Benin City, in the south of Nigeria. And in fact, they are going into prostitution network. So they start from Nigeria being trafficked and not going as economic migrants, being trafficked. Their passports are taken by the traffickers. They are under voodoo spelling. They are afraid of their family are threatened. Some believe they're going to be a waitress in Europe and so on, but they all go into prostitution. So it's not about giving them refugee status, because we put them in open reception center in Italy, and what happens to them? The day after, they leave the centers, they are gone, and they disappear. And so is the policy answer only to rescue them at sea, to offer them the possibility to do prostitution in Europe, or is the answer going to in Nigeria and address the root cause of migration here? And here's the fight against the trafficker in Nigeria, stopping that flows from Nigeria. So, as I said, there's no easy answer. It has to be a comprehensive approach. So we have to do the fight against the trafficker, the fight against smugglers. We have to open more legal ways to Europe, and I fully agree. People are getting visa. If you are coming from Nigeria, we are giving thousands of visas to Nigerian people. But there are more people who want to come. So we have to offer more opportunity, work permit, student permit, so that they can study abroad and so on. So we have to offer a better legal migration avenue. That's for sure. But we have also to put more money in development, get more projects, address the root cause of migration. It has to be a comprehensive answer. And then when we turn to conflict zone, like Syria, we have also to see why the Syrians were leaving from Turkey. They were in Turkey, so their life was not under threat. But what happened? No access to the work market. Children not going to school. The first year is okay, but after 2 or 3 years, it's getting heavy. So they were desperate. Food program was decreased and so on. So they decided to leave. But the best answer often is to keep them in the region and to help the neighbored region to to sustain, the refugees in the region, so that when the civil war is over, they go back easily. And that means more investment in Turkey, more investment in Jordan, more investment in Lebanon to help the refugee in the region, to avoid that they continue their journey and take the risk to cross the sea and die at sea. So we have to invest much more, and that's what we have done after the crisis. After the wake-up call, we are invested massively also in helping the refugees in the region, in Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey. So what I'm trying to say is that it's not one solution. It's a number of components that we have to provide a policy answer which is really complete to address the issue. And this issue, we'll face it for many, many years. The demography in Africa is such that we have to invest a lot in Africa to address the root cause of migration. And it will continue for many years.
Could I just quickly follow up on the Libyan example? Would that also include sort of assisting with the detention facilities in Libya? I mean, people were comparing assisting Turkey might be a different question than assisting who in Libya, right? There's a question mark about who exactly you will be assisting in these detention centers that are, their sort of situation is very precarious and very uncertain what happens to people once you're in a detention center in Libya.
Yes, we cannot compare Turkey and Libya. The situation is completely different. And the way the migrants are treated in Turkey has nothing to do with the way they are treated in Libya. That's why we have, the Commission is financing currently IOM and UNHCR to invest in Libya, to improve the reception center in Libya. And we have also put a 80 million euro package in December, also to address the issue which was said before, where people want to go back home. They are detained in appalling conditions, and they decide to go back home voluntarily. So we are trying with IOM also to finance the return of the migrants to their country of origin when they want to do it on a voluntary basis. At the same time, we are engaging with the official recognized government, GNA, to try to work with the Libyan Coast Guard, also to improve their search and rescue capabilities. Because as it was said in the map, you can see that most of the incidents are happening more and more in the territorial waters. And so we have an interest also that the Libyan Coast Guard intervene. They are the closest, and to save lives. So we are currently training a number of Libyan Coast Guard, and after the training, we intend to give back some ships to the Libyan Coast Guard so that they can do search and rescue operation, but in a gradual manner and under a very strong monitoring to avoid, because we know the situation and the fact that there are different militia factions and so on. So we have to be very careful in what we do. So it's a very targeted action for the time being. We are not engaging with the Libyan government like we have done with Turkey.
What do you think about this newest policy response, in particular concerning Libya?
Yeah, well, it sounds pretty good what you say, but I'm sorry to sort of give a few other elements which we see, and starting with the EU-Turkey deal last year. We have to be aware that the European politics play a huge role. Yeah? And what happens with the EU-Turkey deal? We saw the numbers. Yeah? They almost went down to zero, yeah? From 1 million to sort of a very small number last year. But what consequences do that have? Yeah? Turkey sends back Syrians back to Syria. All neighboring countries for months and months now have shut all the borders to Syria. So the Syrians in a civil war country are trapped in the country. There are no way out. And this is not only, but it is partly on the European politics to shut up the borders and to make the fortress Europe. And I think we have to be very much aware of this. Yeah? So the EU-Turkey deal, even so it's praised to say, well, yeah, we really could sort of stem the flow. Yeah, these words I find critical anyway. But yeah, so we have to, and even sort of Kenya now says, well, we can close down Dadaab, yeah, the biggest refugee camp on earth, yeah, and we push the Somalis back to Somalia, where probably we can easily agree that Somalia is not the safest place on earth. And this is sort of for the eastern route. Yeah? If we look into Libya, and the trouble is, and you mentioned, this country is not a safe place. Yeah? And I have to say, when I left Libya in end of January, and then there was the Malta summit, and I heard that sort of the European politics said, yeah, we're going to improve the detention center and we make them good and then we can send back people. Come on, how naive is this? How many of you people are international staff working in Libya? Yeah? How many organizations working with international staff in Libya today? How safe are the structures in Libya today? This is none. Yeah? So I'm sorry to be a little bit sort of stronger on this point. You don't. There is no economy deals with Libya, because everyone who runs a company says, I'm not dealing with a failed state where all the investment I do is not fruitful. Yeah. So all the politic talk to say, well, we improve the situation in Libya, it's not proven. I've heard when I was in Tunis before I entered Libya, yeah, I've talked to many, including your colleagues in Tunis, and they said, yeah, we invest this and this amount of money, this city and there and there. And if you go into Libya, sorry, I've not seen anything of that happening. Yeah? So, and I know it is difficult. Yeah? It is difficult to deal with a failed state. Yeah? But I think it is even more difficult to state that everything will get better in Libya because we invest in Libya, but nobody is on the ground. Yeah? And it is not that unsafe, but this is another thing. And then again, sort of, I think if we can get rid of the smugglers tomorrow, if we have legal pathways. That doesn't mean that they all have to come to Europe, but we deal with the people and their requests before they go on a deathly Mediterranean journey. And this, I've not seen any steps taken. Yeah. So European politics saying, yeah, we save lives, number one, stopping the smuggling business, but honestly, what we see is mainly focusing on the smuggling business without any success, because the people are so desperate, they will find their ways anyway, yeah? And they find different smugglers to come to Europe. Yeah? So the smuggling business will only be sort of stopped once the refugees find different ways, legal pathways to a safe country, wherever that is.
So, coming back to, can international law or EU law or anything gives us anything concrete? Because you started saying that, it tells conflicting things, right? It allows us to talk about illegal migrants. It also talks about refugees. So is this just a completely open, unconstrained policy area? And, whoever has the power in the European politics will end up making the decisions with nothing constraining these policies.
So what we do have is this obligation of non-refoulement, this obligation to provide protection, but the obligation is only operative if the individuals manage to reach the borders of the state or cross those borders, or fall within the control of the state exercised extraterritorially. So that's helpful for people who manage to get to countries that are willing to provide protection. But of course, what we're seeing in the cases that are being discussed are, for example, Syrians who manage to escape the problems that they face in Syria. So in that sense, they've achieved protection, but then want to move on to a situation where the material conditions are better. And what's significant to think about here is that the international protection of refugees doesn't itself deal with that issue. It deals with the initial issue of protection. So once individuals have managed to reach or cross the borders of a state's territory, then they get the protection from that state. So, for example, Turkey or Lebanon, but they don't have any entitlement then to move on any further. And so other states where those individuals might wish to move are entirely free to prevent them from making those further journeys through the carrier sanctions and visa restrictions that I mentioned. So if we think of refugees who've fled Syria and Lebanon and Turkey, or who've managed to cross over to Greece and still feel that, compelled to move on further, have no legal right to do so in international law. And by the same token, other states, European states, for example, in Northern Europe, don't have any corresponding obligation to allow those individuals in. Now, of course, there is the exception within the European Union of Schengen free movement, which of course enabled people who'd managed to get into the EU to move within it from the poorer southern countries such as Greece to countries like Germany. But even there, of course, they had to make a further irregular move through the non-Schengen countries of Bulgaria and Romania, or through the non-EU former Yugoslav states to get up to Northern Europe. But outside of these exceptional arrangements within the EU, there's no right of movement across borders that could be exercised by individuals seeking to obtain protection beyond the initial destination of escape. So, of course, then by definition, any effort to try to do this has to be irregular, illegal. And therefore, it is this which provides the backdrop to the activities of the smugglers. It is this which partly provides the economic model that was mentioned before. There would be no economic model for smuggling if regular migration was possible. And that also needs to be acknowledged when thinking about what incentivizes and rewards the smuggling industry. This is, of course, something that is rarely acknowledged within European circles, because then European states would have to accept partly their own responsibility for this situation, rather than seeing it as it is seen at present as something that a situation in which they play the role of disinterested charitable bystanders, rather than actually as actors whose own actions are partly playing a determinative role in this situation. And that problem is a political problem which the law then plays partly a role in enabling. So the only way of challenging this is actually through a departure from the law. So the migrants themselves moving illegally, or of course, states choosing to waive their legal entitlements to go beyond what they're legally obliged to do by choosing to allow more refugees in. So, of course, the prominent example in Europe is of course this country, where the decision made to go beyond what Germany was legally obliged to do, particularly in deciding to suspend Germany's entitlements under Dublin to return people back to the first EU country they arrived at, mostly Greece. So it's actually going beyond legal entitlements that led to what is regarded to be one of the most humanitarian responses, that of Germany, rather than, as it were, compliance with the law. If Germany had stuck to the legal regime, then under the Dublin arrangements, people could have all been sent back. People who got to Germany, most of them could all have been sent back to southern Europe. And this disproportionate regime within Europe is, of course, replicated globally. So most of the world's refugees are, despite what some Europeans think, hosted in developing countries, and international law doesn't provide any mechanism of challenging that, providing an equitable system of hosting refugees between states. So what's significant about these dangerous journeys and the activities of smugglers is that they are the chief actors who are disrupting this unequal, inequitable system of refugee protection. For every Syrian who manages through these dangerous crossings to get to Europe, that is one less Syrian refugee, if these people are refugees, hosted in a developing country. So it is the absence of a regular, generally accepted system of equitable arrangements, which leaves then the only option being these illegal and dangerous modes of achieving protection, but also achieving equitable, the equitable distribution of hosting refugees between states. Finally, of course, it's important to acknowledge, and it's been mentioned throughout, this distinction between refugees and so-called economic migrants. And I would just, I mean, there are all sorts of problems with that distinction, but essentially we have to always think about how we would regard all the arguments that we're hearing today if we were thinking about, depending on how deserving we think the people are. So the economic migrant concept is being invoked usually to suggest that these people don't necessarily have such a great deserving case to migrate into Europe. If that is the case, it should be acknowledged as such, and there should therefore be, I think, a more upfront acknowledgement that really the policy is to keep people out, and that really is what the law should be enabling. And if that's so, I think the difficulty then is, given that we were told at the beginning of this presentation that, in fact, this is a picture of mixed migration, how we deal with policy responses which don't distinguish between the two, between refugees and others, so-called economic migrants, but which are actually driven by treating them all as if they were economic migrants. So if the policy is to keep economic migrants out, but actually keeps everyone out, then what is the role for refugee protection in that paradigm?
I'll stop you there for a minute. Right, I want to turn to the floor at this point. Actually, what kind of policy responses you want to see more or less of is what I'd like to hear from the floor, because we've seen that actually the policy responses have been continuous. There hasn't been a rupture or a change. The way that the EU is trying to address the problem is saving lives and also focusing on the incentive structures for smugglers and maybe long-term causes, right? So there's an attention on this. And there's been a couple of other thoughts amongst the panelists. So what do you want to see more or less of? Yes, please.
Thank you very much for your insights. My name is Anne Vlaake. I study here public policy. I have a rather, maybe a bit of a different question. The European Court of Justice recently decided that the EU-Turkey statement is actually a non-EU agreement and rather an agreement between the heads of states. And I was wondering what you think are the implications for judging on its legality, and as well as on the future involvement of the Commission within this agreement. Thank you.
We'll hold on to that. We'll hold on to that for a minute and try to hear a little bit more from the ground. But we'll hold on to that question. Yes, please, at the back.
Hi, my name is Nora Warning. I'm a second year MIA student, and my question is on the legal pathways you mentioned. So, for example, the right to family reunification, and I wanted to know you said there are legal obligations by the states to fulfill human rights obligations, and I wanted to know how the European courts could push member states to fulfill that obligation of family reunification, and also how the European Commission could push member states politically to enable that in practice.
Thank you. Please, right at the front here.
Good evening. My name is Susanna Krüger. I work with Save the Children. So a colleague of mine is sitting there. We have a vessel as well in the Mediterranean. And I have a simple question that I have never understood so far in terms of policy. Why do you think that creating legal pathways would prevent people from coming over that are denied these legal pathways? I don't understand how can you create if someone can apply to come to Europe and he's being denied because we cannot take them all, you know? So what are you doing with these people that are being denied access? So why do you think they wouldn't come anymore? This is what I don't understand. You understand what I mean? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking around for maybe some more comments or questions. Yes, one more at the back. Let's take that too.
My name is Leonard Östergaard. I'm also a first-year MA student, and my question is concerning the migration or the problems in Libya. Do you think it is possible, maybe in the midterm, to negotiate any agreements that would enable refugees or migrants to come back, to go back to the countries they come from? Like any agreements that would actually make this return you spoke of possible of migrants who do not want to cross the Mediterranean Sea, but are actually forced to. Thank you.
Okay. So, shall we start with the family reunification and a few other questions? Yes, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, okay, I can start with the family reunification. Actually, we have a directive, so EU directive on family reunification. So the migrant who is entitled to stay in the EU has the right for family reunification, and the member states are supposed to implement it. So if they infringe that right, the Commission can take them to court. So that's one of the possibilities that we can have. So that's the first question. There was a question on the court, the European Court in Luxembourg, on the EU-Turkey statement. In fact, the question was launched by the European Parliament because they were not associated, and normally in an international agreement, they need to give their consent. And because it was a kind of fait accompli, they didn't have to give their consent, and so they went to the court to see whether it was an international agreement as such. And what the court has said is it's not an international agreement as such, it's only a commitment at head of state level with Turkey. But in practice, it looks the same, and that's off the record here, but it looks really the same, and the Commission is fully involved in the implementation of the EU-Turkey statement, including the support to the refugee in Turkey and the financing which goes with it. On the question on the legal pathways and more legal pathways, I think you've got a fair point, but you have to look at it. Let's take the example of resettlement. If you offer the possibility of people to be resettled, they will wait. They will not, because they have a chance, they have hope. And it's when you lose hope that you leave and that you take the risk to go by sea. So if you take the example of Syrians in Turkey, when they knew that they had the chance to be processed for resettlement, they were waiting. I'd say, okay, maybe we have a chance, let's wait, we might be resettled. And for instance, when Donald Trump decided to stop the resettlement of Syrians, there were 20,000 people who were in the pipeline, and these people had hope. And now they lost hope, so they might come. So in fact, when you have the possibility to get a work permit or a visa for students. You are a student in Africa and you say, oh, maybe I will get it. You try, you wait, and you try your chance, and the next year you try again. So, but there is some possibility to arrive to Europe, then at least you prevent a lot of the departure. It doesn't mean that the one who have been denied will not try the irregular manner, the illegal way, but you might grab a big part of the population and stabilize them, because they have some opportunities, they have some hopes. And what we need to do in Africa is really to offer more work permit and student permit. I think that will help quite a lot. But let's face it, I just want to flag, the importance for. It's not like only saving lives. Saving lives is at the end of the story. But here, let's take the example of Guinea. 70% of the population is below 18. 27% of the girls are pregnant between 15 and 18 years old. So the population is doubling every 12 years. And only a third goes to school. So, we have a massive, pressure coming from there. And we'll have to find the solution. So that's why we need also return agreements with countries, so that if people are coming irregularly, we have to find a way, if they are economic migrants and have no right to stay in Europe, to be sent back home in decent conditions with reintegration package, but we have to do it. And that's what we are negotiating. We are negotiating readmission agreement with a number of African countries. We have one with Pakistan, with Western Balkan countries and so on, but we need this type of agreement with Africa as well, because we have to also to prevent. It's a balanced approach. It's not only one solution. We need to have a comprehensive and balanced approach. I think that was it.
Yeah, I would sort of respond to what you said. I mean, this is for me it sounds a little bit a hypocritical thing, yeah, because we don't know what would happen once we have sort of hotspots, whatever, outside Europe, where people can apply for asylum, and what happens to those. That's how I understood you would deny asylum, yeah, whether they would still find illegal ways into Europe or not. I mean, for me, sort of let's maybe settle the first thing and allow these people to find a place to safely ask for asylum, and then if it's allowed, then they can move safely into Europe, and then probably in my imagination that would dramatically decrease the number of people who want to try to come to Europe, because today. And I mean, you probably know, but I've on the rescue ship, of course, the majority, even 2 years ago, were from Western Africa. Yeah? There was a young woman traveling with her boyfriend, certainly not a prostitute. Yeah, of course, there you find all types of people on these ships. She was healthy. She had a quick journey to Libya. She was on the vessel, and she got sick in the rubber boat, because women and children usually based in the center, where there you have a mixture of seawater, petrol, and urine. Yeah, so it's a very acid thing. Yeah, so she was completely burned, second, third degree, all around her hips and her legs. Yeah, so when we took her to our rescue ship, we asked her to take a long shower and took sort of sterile bandages around. And once we reached Italy, she had high fever and she had almost a septic condition. So she made it all the way, and on the last trip, she got severely sick. Another example of a young man from Ghana. He traveled with his brother, and his brother was shot dead in Tripoli by just walking around. He was shot in his eye, lost his eyesight. He came to the boat. What is he? Yeah, again, yeah, these are people who have suffered extremely. Yeah? And as a doctor, I'm not a politician. I'm not sort of a lawyer to distinguish what is this. Yeah? But I think we have to remind ourselves, these people who have come all this way, and this is, I think we really forgot about over the last few years. Yeah, in 2015, I think there was a sort of a more sensitivity here in Europe about these stories. Yeah. It is not possible to generalize. Yeah? And if we look and say these are prostitutes, these are just migrant workers, we have, as a doctor, we have to listen to the individual story and then make a judgment. Yeah? So, and the people who make it to Libya, survive the traveling. Yeah? Again, I think this is something we have to focus on, not the smuggling business. Yeah? This is a legal thing. Yeah, to your question, sort of how could these people, how could we negotiate ways for them to return safely to their home country. Very interesting debate I had with one of the manager of one of the, it was another detention center. He was a desperate guy, and he said that it's totally impossible almost to reach the diplomats of the different countries. He had, at the time, he had about a dozen or 24 different nationalities in his detention center. And he said, well, finally I reached one of my colleagues this morning. Yeah? And I said, well, I have a couple of your nationalities here in this detention center. What should I do? And he said, I don't care, this diplomat of that country. And he said, well, but I have to do something. And then this diplomat, I don't know, I wasn't in that conversation, but he said, shoot them. Yeah. So this is probably a very bizarre and extreme example, but this is a bit what you see, the value of individuals traveling through Libya. Yeah. And I think sort of the lack of a central government, and this is one thing, the lack of any international force, including Europe, being able to do something substantial in Libya, and the huge suffering of specifically the sub-Saharan, but also the Eritrean, Somalis, Syrians who travel through Libya. This is existential here, and I think so. There is a long-term, mid-term thing, but the immediate thing for these people, they need to be rescued, and I think we lose that in our debate, and we think we can deal with Libya as a normal state. Yeah. In that respect, Libya is even less reliable than Syria is, and I'm sure we don't believe that Syria is a very good place to negotiate with Assad and others. Yeah. So whatever we believe in Europe, we can instill in politics there. At least I've not seen any reliable structure. It's small term. We can negotiate with hospitals. Hospitals have quite a big autonomy in Libya, so they can import goods much more than the hospitals can do in Germany. Here we rely on the health system much more. But so the structures are the clans, the families, the cities, the hospitals, and you can link up, you can build up relationships. But in order, our saying is, it is almost impossible. It's very difficult to do something inside Libya. We are very frustrated with a lot of discussions and negotiations in Libya with our teams there, but it is close to impossible to change anything in Libya from abroad, and that's what basically we see with most of the agencies and certainly the politics.
Thank you. Do you want to say any one sentence or two?
Yeah. So I guess just to follow on from that, this humanitarian imperative to rescue, which of course is an obligation in the law of the sea if there's a certain degree of proximity between the rescuing vessel and the people in need of rescue. The question then, though, is what happens to them once there is the immediate issue of the preservation of life and perhaps immediate medical needs are dealt with. And there really is where the debate exists. What should be the fate of these people, and should there be a difference depending on the particular basis on which they're traveling? And this goes back then to the question of the distinction between refugees and everyone else, including so-called economic migrants. And insofar as the response is going to make a distinction between those two classes of people, the law requires that there is a process for making a determination as to which class individuals fall into. And that's the great challenge, particularly in the context of the Mediterranean, is where that should happen, on what basis it should happen, and is it done so in a fair way. But then, of course, when it is done, who then, for those people who do have a right to protection, who then is given the responsibility to host them? And what we also need that's lacking at the moment is, as I mentioned before, an equitable system across states for hosting refugees. And absent that system, the responsibility will fall disproportionately on a minority of states, as I say, and it tends to be the states in the world that are least able in material terms to discharge those obligations, whether it's least able comparatively within Europe, so the poorest states of Southern Europe versus the rest of Europe, or indeed globally.
you. Do I have any burning questions or comments? Yes, I do.
Hi.
Comments. We're welcoming comments at this point.
It's more of a question actually than a comment, if I may. It's about the distribution of the burden, as you just mentioned, and also a little bit about the excuse me, of the work maybe, or of the challenge, and a little bit about the capacity of the European Commission to enforce actually rules, because so in September 2015 there was this relocation mechanism, this 2-year plan, that has not been really implemented by a lot of countries that refuse to take on migrants or refugees, asylum seekers, that are eligible, so that actually have claims for asylum, that have the right to stay in Europe. And Hungary and Slovakia have filed suits against that, and many countries are not living up to that commitment. So I was wondering what leverage there is to actually follow through with that.
Did I have one more hand? I actually do, yes. Please, we'll take these. This is my final round, so do raise your hands.
Bodo Weber from the Democratization Policy Council. Mr. Muschel, I have a follow-up question to your answer on colleague's question who basically stole my question on the General Court of the EU ruling of February 28 this year on that the EU-Turkey deal, in fact, legally is not a deal between Turkey and the EU, but between Turkey and the EU member states. So I think the question was, if I correctly understood, what is the legal basis of the European Commission of engaging in implementation of the EU-Turkey deal if the deal is not a deal between the EU as a legal entity and Turkey? I'm not sure I understood your answer to that question.
Okay, I think we have another question. We'll take these or comments.
I'm a recent UCL law graduate, so my question is mostly to Ralph. I was wondering what your opinion, or I would like to hear your opinion on the recent European Court judgment that humanitarian visas could not be enforced at the European level, and which was sort of, an attempt to get legal access. And now that the European Court said that this is not a European-wide responsibility and that it's up to every state to decide whether or not to grant humanitarian visas, how we can sort of, find different ways of legal access, considering that there's just a very recent decision that said, which to me almost seems like a political decision, which said we don't want legal access at the European level. Thanks.
Yes, and this is my final hand over here. Okay.
Hi, I'm Samantha Spilka. I'm a graduating MIA student here at Hertie. My question actually goes back to policy practices. We, in the debate round, spoke about voluntary return and setting up packages for those who make it to Libya and voluntarily want to go back to their home country. My question falls in line with those people may not be safe when they return, though, because they may be ostracized from their communities. And socially, it may be hard for them to return, especially for those the women that you were talking about that get trafficked and put into prostitution, they may be rejected from their communities. So how do we create policy that allows them to return safely, because maybe in their journey they actually it became a non-safe route for them to go back?
That is the final one. Please, the gentleman in the front row. Please.
Hi, Frank Lasko from IOM here in Berlin. Question to the panel. So we heard right at the beginning, the number of deaths continues to rise. We now have Frontex squabbling with NGOs about, are we doing enough to save people in the Mediterranean? We have more people out there trying to save lives than ever before. You have all mentioned that we should do a variety of things to try and address this issue. But if you were able to do one thing in the next 6 months, what would be your top priority in order to address this problem?
I like this question. Okay, that's a good one. So we'll return for brief comments, even though some of the questions may require lengthy comments. But So shall we start with you, Laurent?
Yes, it's a lot of questions and we're touching all the areas. So very briefly and in a very schematic manner. On the voluntary return, first of all, we always process the people according to their own merits. It's individual case basis. So every people arriving in Italy or Greece goes through interview. We assess the case, whether they are granted refugee status or not. And if not, if they are economic migrants, then we look at the possibility of return. We offer voluntary return package. We work with IOM to offer return package. And there are integration package where the people, we make sure that they are safely returned. If it's not safe for a woman who has been trafficked to be returned, she will get as a refugee status, or subsidiary protection. She will not be returned if it's not safe for her to be returned. And we are looking also at a lot at now community-based approach. That means that when people are returned, they are well accepted by the community or better accepted because we have measures to support the whole village in Africa or the whole community, so that there is also benefits for the whole community, and they are less ostracized, as you mentioned. But it's difficult. It doesn't work all the time, but it's what we are doing quite a lot with IOM. And we have returned people from Libya. IOM is returning people, I think around 6,000 since over the last few months. So it's happening. It's not always the African people who say shoot them. We are also doing voluntary return. It works. So it's not always black and white. Yeah, well, you were saying that I was saying all the women were prostitution, so just shoot back. 17
Hang on.
Exactly, I never said that.
So,
I just said that the majority of women coming from Nigeria end up in traffic. And they don't start as prostitutes; they unfortunately end up in trafficking. Just to put the picture right. On the humanitarian issue and the court decision, it's not the court making policy. The court has looked at the rules at EU level and the visa code. We have a visa code. We have rules for issuance of visa, and this does not cover humanitarian visa, so it's still a national competence. So the Just Court stated the fact that, okay, what is harmonized at European level is when you get a 90 days visa to enter Schengen, but the humanitarian visa, which is a specific case for humanitarian admission, is not ruled at European level, so it's a competence of the member states. On the Turkey statement, EU-Turkey statement, to be a bit clear, what we have done, we have taken the European Council decision to finance, to put money in Turkey, and we have developed projects in Turkey. We are supporting the Greek authorities in processing the asylum cases, and also we have helped for the return operations, and this is according to the statement, but also according to the fact that the Turks have accepted to take them back, and so it's a combination of legal elements, and it's not according to an international agreement, but according to both the willingness of the Turkish side and the European Council decision. On the relocation, which is a very complex issue, first of all, relocation is piling up. We have done 17,000 people since the beginning of the process. So it's the biggest scheme ever in our history, relocated 17,000 people. But still, there are member states who are refusing to take them, as you rightly said, like Hungary. Slovakia, I was in Slovakia last week. They have taken 16, but which is not a lot. So we have been pushing, but Hungary, 0. So again, we have the possibility to go for infringement. But for the time being, the Commission is looking at the possibility, and we have not taken a final decision yet. You have to take into account the overall environment. We are also discussing the reform of the Dublin system, where we'll have a solidarity mechanism, where Hungary and the Visegrad country are dead against it. So we are trying also to find a compromise there. There are different files that we are looking at the same time before taking a final decision on what to do with these countries in a current difficult political environment. Thank you.
So let's get the 6-month question as well. What would you do if there was one thing you were able to do?
Well, now, it's a tough one. I have to think again, but I think that we have to find a solution in Libya. That's one thing. A political situation. We have to solve the political mess in Libya, and we have some responsibility in what happened, and we have to re-engage there and to stabilize the country to make sure that we can start to talk with a stabilized, unified government and find solution for the migrants there. Many are stranded and will continue to be stranded there in appalling conditions. So the key is now to engage with Libya, much more than what we are doing, and avoid that it becomes a new Syria.
What would you do, Ralph?
My fantasy world would involve, it's an idea which is not popular at the moment, which is to look at the root causes of forced migration, but to do so thinking about things more structurally than the superficial way in which the root causes tend to be, for example, in the case of Syria, that it is Assad and IS and other actors. So I'm thinking about the realities in an interdependent, globalized world of profound, unequal economic and power imbalances, that it's simply naive for the states in Europe, the richest states in the world, not to see that in some way they are linked in a causal fashion to some of the root causes of forced migration. And if we can try to foreground those links, which at the moment are barely acknowledged. So to give one example, the global arms industry, which is entirely legally enabled.
2 more sentences.
And the way in which that is linked in all sorts of ways to the militarization in Syria, to the support of Saudi, its support of extremist Wahhabi Salafist Islam, the connection between that and the ideology of IS, and the connection of all of that back to those states who are resisting more migrants. And I think that if we could shift the perspective towards one of partial responsibility, which is a matter of responsibility and duty rather than humanitarian discretion, then that's a way into making the case for a more generous approach when it comes to hosting refugees than is the case currently.
Thank you. That was a very impressive sentence, though. Under pressure as well. So what would you do? And we'll give you the last word here.
Well, I will be brief. We think that humanitarian visa are good in a crisis like this, and we have to acknowledge this is an acute crisis situation at the moment. We have never had, never had more sort of refugees in the world than we have this year and last years. So looking at the 3 subjects we looked at, this instability in Libya, smuggling business, and rescue operations. I think sort of stopping, and I said that stopping the smugglers is to have legal pathways. That's the easiest and fastest and most efficient way to get them out of their business. Not easy. But that would be my least priority. My second one, of course, stability in Libya is a great thing, but in the absence of a government, in the absence of international actors in the country, this is nothing achievable within a couple of months. So the only way, and that was the question, what can we do in the next 6 months? Get more rescue ships there, because it is completely unacceptable that on the doors of Europe, in 4 years now in a row, more people are drowning, and this is for me. And I, as a doctor, as a humanitarian, I can't get over this. Yeah? And we are not all doing enough. Frontex is not doing enough. NGOs not doing enough. The Italian Coast Guard maybe. Yeah, but this is unacceptable and needs to change. And I want sort of the politicians to shift their priority really to saving lives and not getting mixed up in the smuggling business, which you don't solve with the measures you took over the past years. I think there's a certain proof for that. So saving life with more boats. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, I hope my panelists don't hate me by my sort of gestures here and there, but I'd like to thank all of them individually for their time and for their contribution. I'd like to thank you all for sitting in. This was an extended conversation and your questions. We have a reception outside, and for the first time, I think, that I've been here as a professor, we have, or this is the first time I will be attending this little sort of reception outside. This is hosted by a caterer called Dumuzi. And I'm really encouraging you to get the business cards if you like the work that is done outside by this caterer. This is a catering business that was established by a refugee from Syria. He's arrived in Germany a while back, and he worked in various places, including ESMT, for about 3 months. And only this January he started this catering business. So please do try the reception outside, and if you do enjoy the food that is being prepared by Dumuzi, please do get one of his business cards and distribute the word. And this is a little contribution that we try to make at the very end of this. So thank you very much for being here this evening.